So I think it's time to get started. It's 2:30. Hi, everyone. I'm Charazette Poignant from Kage Publishers, and I will have the honor to host this webinar today. I work at Kage in the Industry and Society Market Unit. So first of all, thank you for joining us. And today we will share the experience and the opinion of our highly experienced guests on plain language summaries and why this format is a good tool to inform HCPs and patients. So let's explain in plain. I'm excited to moderate today's expert panel where we will discuss the perception of PLS, plain language summary, and how this piece of content has evolved over the past years. Indeed, PLS used to be seen as a strict piece of written content, but it's important to make people realize that PLS is much more than just 250 words. I'm sure you will agree. We will share our ideas of what a PLS can be when you think about what does it serve, what is the purpose of plain language summary, and who is it meant for? Very important question. It's now a very practical support for both clinicians and patients, and I'm proud that the publishing industry has reframed this piece of content in a more effective way, I believe. Why this happened, I would share with you my 2 cents. I would say thanks to the contribution of all stakeholders of the healthcare ecosystem. So for this reason, I'm delighted to have highly knowledgeable representatives of different stakeholders today that I will introduce to you in a minute. But before, let me just quickly introduce Kage Publishers, who has enabled the organization of this webinar. Just need to go to the right slide. Kage is a globally active medical scientific publishing house whose purpose is to connect and advance health sciences, but also to facilitate the communication and the access of information between the different stakeholders of the healthcare ecosystem. So now I can introduce you to our guest speakers. And so joining us today, we have Catherine Richards-Golini. She's a PhD and a healthcare publications editor at Kage. So she's one of my colleagues. She writes and edits patient healthcare materials, including plain language summaries, of course, and is also an experienced PLS reviewer. Catherine also conducts research in the field of language and healthcare communication. Welcome, Catherine.
Hello.
Yuan works at Bayer as a director and publication strategy lead in Global Medical Affairs Oncology publication team. Yuan has more than 20 years experience in medical communication and publication. She has been very active in leading new publication initiatives that are patient-focused to increase data transparency and improve patients' understanding of complex scientific publications. She is also a certified medical publication professional. Thank you, Yuan, for taking the time today.
Hello, everyone.
Trishna Barrera is a highly recognized patient engagement consultant. Trishna is a multi-award-winning health advocate. She plays a major role in putting the patient voice in the healthcare arena, in the area of PLS, among other things. She is an experienced reviewer and has helped develop PLS training and toolkits, and also has supported the development of PLS guidance. Thank you, Trishna, for being with us today. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
So let me share the menu of our webinar today. In this webinar, we will talk about how and why PLS have changed, how to make PLS digestible and more discoverable, and also about if AI is a help or a threat when writing PLS. So only hot topics at the moment. And we're going to start with the first question to open this exciting discussion. As mentioned previously, PLS have moved from being short, text-only summaries to embrace different formats over the past few years. Is there any specific reason for that? Would you think this need for change come from the pharma industry, or the patient who are eager to understand more about their conditions, or from the publishing industry? Who wants to start? Catherine?
Yeah, thank you, Shahrazad. We live in a highly digitalized society and a very visual society. The whole world is digitalized and visual. So this is a general move, and we're seeing it across all sectors. And it isn't just about accessing information, but it's also about recording information, analyzing, communicating, disseminating information. And this includes, of course, consumer healthcare information like PLS. So that's one drive, one explanation for this evolution. And I think it's a natural evolution. It's like repackaging the information into all these wonderful formats. Infographic, we haven't mentioned yet the formats, but infographics, videos, animated or otherwise, podcasts, etc. And I would say that that's one significant driver. The other driver is the patient themselves, the healthcare consumer. Patient-centered medicine. It's something that we've known about for a few decades now, and it's not universal, of course, but patients are starting to understand that they have a right to information, and they want the information, and they want to access it. So it's a demand for access to comprehensible health information. And I think the impact of the COVID pandemic accelerated this process. We were suddenly doing everything online, things that we'd only been imagining or dreaming of or dreading in some cases. Suddenly we were doing it all online, and that's accelerated the development. Why we produce PLS varies. Researcher called Stoll, a nice paper there from 2022, categorized it as knowledge, empowerment, communication of research, and improvement of research. So there are different aims there, and that suggests there are different readerships, and different readerships want different formats. I would caution, my final point would be to say we're not moving away from text-only summaries. The short text-only summary, in my opinion, is the foundation. Once you get the message right, once you get the words right, then you can do everything else that you want to do with it. And I think HCPs have in the few studies that exist, it seems that they prefer the short text-based summary rather than the infographic summary. So get the words right, the other formats will be right too.
Well, thank you, Catherine. I think you're totally right. I mean, Trishna, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. Well, so firstly, I mean, I completely agree with a lot of what Catherine has said. I think there's a number of factors at play, and some of the most important are being driven by the change in the way just people generally are accessing and demanding information, and then more specifically, the way in which patients are demanding and accessing health-related information. I think also, and Catherine didn't mention this, but I think the advent of open access is creating a need for essentially guardrails to prevent misinterpretation of information that traditionally was only accessible to experts. And so this needs to be in formats that will be more suitable for non-expert audiences, which, you know, as Catherine mentions, you know, some of the different formats, it's not just text only. So I think that has had an influence as well. I think increasingly there's also a realization that digital enhancement, which includes PLS in different formats, that improves the reach of scientific information. So this is an area which really, really interests me, and there's been various presentations about this at ISMAP, the International Society for Medical Publications Professionals, at various annual meetings and also other meetings as well. So it's not just of benefit to the readers, but also the authors as well, to evolve their PLS, because we know that having a PLS attached can improve the readership of an article. And then I think my final point is that we're moving towards a shared decision-making model in healthcare. That's creating more demand for complex information to be made more understandable. Again, this then drives a need for different formats so that people can use the information that is out there to inform their own healthcare decisions and the decisions that are being made about the healthcare of their family, people they care for, or themselves.
Right. You, what do you think of this?
Oh yeah, I totally echo what Catherine and Trishna just said. I think that patient-friendly communication of relevant information is a critical factor for creating value for patients. And in the real-world setting, we see that insufficient health literacy is very common, and there's more than half of patients not understanding what to do after they have an office visit or a consultation, or have started their suggested treatment plan. So there's definitely this unmet need and this lack of education that patients really need. So effective patient communication utilizes real patient insights, and co-creation of plain language summary with patient authors can really help patient understanding, experience, and ultimately optimize their treatment outcomes. So when we combine the first-hand gathered patient insights, I think that the development of new innovations with different formats of plain language summary and the digital enhancements can truly reflect the full spectrum of patient needs and wants. So this is a slide that showing that this year, when we worked with patient authors on a patient perspective presentations at the EAU conference this year, on the topic of shared decision making, Trishna touched on that as well. We learned that clinicians and patients have very different perspectives and considerations when they make treatment decisions. So as you can see on this slide, clinicians' decisions are typically directed by medical factors, such as considering the efficacy of the treatment option, whether or not it prolongs overall survival, whereas the patients and caregivers, their decision in treatment selection is mainly driven by their own personal circumstances, needs and goals, such as their quality of life. What matters to them is really, the tolerability profile, not necessarily all about, how effective the drug is. So also in patient preference surveys, oftentimes patients tended to be more willing to consider good tolerability profile that don't impair the quality of life over increased survival benefit. I think those patient survey results have been published in literature showing that patient insights. So when patients who are very well informed about their treatment options and are able to be involved in shared decision making, they're more likely to adhere to treatment, have improved treatment satisfaction, and through open communications with their clinicians to align on treatment goals. This is really the best way, and this underlines the need of the plain language summary, patient educational materials, and this is an unmet need for us to really explore the best way to provide that patient education through plain language summary, through publications, and help patients better understand about their conditions and available treatment options.
Perfect. So you have already touched a point that I'm going to ask you a question about. So omnichannel is everywhere, but recently it has been pointed out that not just the channels are important to convey the message, but as the three of you already mentioned, the format is also very important. They need to be considered to reach a wider audience and to share the right information. So yeah, and move to the next slide. Sorry for that. So as you can see in this slide, there are some learning preferences as learners. We all have on for infographics, when others need to listen, especially when commuting from work to home. So different learning preferences. So what are the optimal formats for a plain language summary, and what are the key aspects to consider when deciding for the right format? How would you decide that this is a good format to produce? So here, I would very much value the opinion of an industry expert. Ewan, you go first?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the creation of the plain language summary content and determining the best format and also the dissemination channels with patient authors are important factors of successful patient communication. So first and foremost, and very important, is to know your audience, making sure that you fully understand the patient demographic. Who are you writing this plain language summary to? You have to consider their age, sex, ethnicity, the location, whether they're European or US or Asian, socioeconomic status, educational level. So these are all important factors to consider the preferred format, and avoid making any assumptions about them, and instead really listen carefully to the information they share with you about their background, experiences, and educational needs. And we learn, through our collaboration with patient authors that this listening skill is really important, and you ask the right questions to really understand what patients' preferences are in terms of these different formats. And secondly, select the most appropriate communication tools, from study and publication plain language summaries to videos and infographics. There are a plethora of tools available to aid patient communications, and utilize the patient insights, as I mentioned before, that we gather to choose the most appropriate tool for your audience is also important. And thirdly, sharing learnings, close the loop by feedback to the patients about how you have actioned their insights to the development of a solution, whether it's the plain language summary or putting something into the patient educational resource. That's always been, very much appreciated by the patient community. So on this slide, you can see that this was presented by our Bayer Applications team at the DIA Global Annual Meeting a couple years ago, and it was during COVID. So it was a virtual presentation, but we showed that, we conducted a survey among patients and patient advocates. The survey results show that the patient infographics and animated video and the plain language summary publication, the standalone full publications, ranked the top choices that resonate the most with patients as preferred format. And based on these helpful findings, we have continued to explore these digital enhancement in collaboration with different journals, publishers. Now there are even more options, such as the podcast. We're working with journals on utilizing social media channels to broaden the reach in different format and dissemination channels. So there are a lot of things that we can still do and explore and continue to advance what we can serve for the patients.
Well, thank you. Very interesting. Trishna, do you agree with this approach of adapting the formats to according to the reader's preferences?
I think ultimately, yes. But if we're going to do that, it also means that we need to work on making all types of PLS formats more and also equally discoverable. So things like graphical and video formats need to be easily searchable. People need to be able to search for them and find them. So I was actually in a recent ISMAP webinar, and during that webinar, it was said that video abstracts and PLS produce the highest comprehension, understanding, enjoyment, and also desire for more updates amongst readers with a science background, readers with a science-related background, and readers with a non-science background. So basically everyone. Amongst journal audiences, articles with an accompanying video abstract had the highest number of average accesses per year, followed by graphical PLS, which essentially shows how popular these formats are. Format also matters, like I said, depending on the audience. So findings from this survey that was done for the ISMAP webinar showed a clear preference by patients and caregivers for an infographic PLS format amongst the 3 disease states that they assessed, which was psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, and rheumatoid arthritis. But the preliminary results amongst HCPs found that HCPs, both text and graphical plain language content, was valuable. So both formats were considered shareable with peers. I think due to differing format preferences, publishing both plain language content formats, so text, graphics, videos, etc., they may help to cater to those different learning preferences that you've already mentioned. And then amongst publication professionals, infographic summaries were considered to be the most effective publication extenders. So I think that was around 64% of those surveyed. So I think that clearly shows that audience matters when it comes to thinking about the formats that you're looking to potentially produce your PLS in, because different audiences prefer different formats and are digesting and processing this information in different ways.
Well, thank you. Catherine, would you like to add something to that?
Well, I'd like to, but Trishna and Ewan have covered it so well. There's actually very little to add. I agree very much with both what they've said. I was going to add that we're talking as if we have an awful lot of knowledge about patient preference, but we should also remember that the studies that exist, there aren't that many studies actually about patient preference, and thankfully there are more, but there aren't that many. And it's actually remarkably difficult to access or reach is the word really, the more vulnerable patient populations and the people with lower health literacy and the kind of people that frankly don't want to be taking part in these surveys and research studies anyway. And these are the people we need to know more about. I think one of the papers that Trishna referred to there, I think something like 60% of the people involved in that survey were women in their 30s with a university education. So really this is a small slice of the patient demographic. The other thing I would add is that I like the idea of the infographic being pretty much the one thing that HCPs and patients enjoy and get a lot out of. The standalone PLS, these multi-page infographics that also come with a nice summary of the abstract, and I think they were developed initially by the Future Science Group. These are really useful to produce, and I know we've all got experience with them in one form or another. They're citable as a secondary publication, which means we can add a Dewey number to them, which means they are findable, more findable than a visual only PLS. So yeah, that might be the ideal solution. Interestingly, medium difficulty text has also been cited as preferred over easy text. And you know, sometimes people get a bit afraid about the PLS argument and plain language summaries, that we're dumbing things down, but that isn't what patients want. It's not what we're doing, and patients have said they don't want easy read, they want the medium difficulty. As a former linguist, I would say, but what is medium difficulty? But that's the subject for another webinar.
Thank you, Catherine. Very interesting. Trishna, a question for you. Do you think the patient feels more involved now that plain language seems to be, or to include more digestible formats?
So I think rather than necessarily feeling more involved, I think it's more that the patient feels more considered. I think involved is slightly different.
Right.
I think PLS can make patients feel essentially more armed and ready with the knowledge that they need to make informed decisions about their healthcare. I think if we're talking about involvement, I don't think we're there yet. You know, some organizations, they're developing and or publishing PLS. They're involving patients in their development, but not all of the organizations out there are doing that. I think that's a real gap that needs to be filled, because in order to have the best document that is fit for purpose and the most appropriate and suitable for patients, the patients need to be involved in the creation of these documents. So I always recommend that at the very least, a review by a patient advocate who's experienced in plain language summaries, that should be done. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a patient advocate who is in the disease area that the plain language summary is about. In fact, sometimes it can be better if they're not. But there needs to be that oversight, and that the patient advocate needs to be able to have a good enough understanding of the original, whether it's a manuscript, whether it's a poster, whether it's an abstract, to be able to determine if the correct content has been included for the target audience, as well as to be able to assess the document for ease of processing, you know, language, format, layout, all of those kinds of things. So I think having that patient advocate involved is a crucial and key step in the process of developing PLS, but one that not every organisation has yet sort of taken on board and is yet doing, but it's a really, really important part of that development process.
Can I ask you a question about that, Trishna?
Yeah.
There may be people watching this webinar now who are thinking, well, we really want to work with patients and we're not quite sure where to go to get them.
Yeah, so actually that's a question that, believe it or not,
Good question.
I've been asked, yeah, and I've been asked before. So yeah, where there is a willingness, but people are either they're afraid of approaching patient advocates, or they don't know where to find them, particularly ones that have specific expertise in plain language summaries. So some good places to start: webinars like this one. So, you know, if anybody wants to reach out to me, feel free. Talking to patient advocates who are involved in already involved in plain language summaries. So I have a network. I know other patient advocates who are working in plain language summaries. Look for patient authors. So there is a move towards using the affiliation of patient author, so that patient authors are more easily discoverable. If you have patient authors on manuscripts, they're already very aware of the publication process. So that can help in terms of them potentially being brought into the development of plain language summaries. And then meetings like, you know, for example, ISMAP, some of the conferences where you've got patient engagement streams. LinkedIn is a great place for being able to find patient advocates. And then you can also talk, if you're working in industry, or you're working, for example, in a publisher, talk to colleagues, because they may already be working with patient advocates in other areas, other scopes of work. But, you know, people who know me know that I work in lots of different things within patient engagement. Publications is only one part. So I could be working with, let's say, a pharma company, and I don't know, helping them to set up a patient council, for instance. But if somebody from their publications team came to talk to the people that I was working with and say, hey, look, do you know somebody who could potentially help us with plain language summaries? Then they would know to say, oh, actually, we're working with Trishna, and she's got experience in plain language summaries. So I think it's a combination of things, but we are out there. We are much more visible than I think we used to be. And those are, yeah, I would say those are some of the key areas. So word of mouth, online, like webinars and things, conferences, meetings, social media, particularly LinkedIn, and then also networks and talking to other patient advocates who potentially have had that network of contacts.
Well, thank you, Trishna. Very useful, I think. Ewan, what is your opinion regarding patient involvement in the creation of content, especially scientific content, in particular PLS?
Yeah, so from my experience, working at Bayer, we work very closely with our global medical affairs patient engagement teams, and they network with our country patient engagement teams, and then that's just how we establish, the patient network, identifying the patient insights, what are the unmet educational needs are, and what kind of patient advocates or patient candidates would be suitable for working with us on plain language summary co-content creations. So we have done a number of scientific publications in plain language summary with patient advocates, caregivers, as authors on phase 3 trial results, as well as some of the review papers on the disease education and treatment landscape review. So involving patients, trying to encourage them to tell their own stories, their perspectives, and the authorship consideration can really help enhance the relevance of the plain language summary publications to the patient community, because they bring in a very unique angle when they look at the clinical trial results reporting, very different from how clinicians will look at that, especially those patient-reported outcomes or the endpoints that are very patient relevant. They can look at this and try to put their perspective into context as to what it means to the patient community. And also, cross-functional alignment and collaboration with our country medical teams, which I find to be very essential to engage with patients and incorporate their voices into the publications. Learning that, in different countries, they may have different language requirements. So we have done translations of our plain language summary publications into 7 different languages, in Italian, French, Spanish, Japanese, Chinese, Portuguese. So we find, the needs from those major countries that really want to have the translation and to be able to understand the plain language summary content. So I think, this is all very, very important. I agree with Trishna and Catherine that, involving patient authors, we can do a lot more,
Right.
and finding the right candidates, patient candidates. Yeah.
Can I just jump in there? So in terms
Sure.
of the patient perspective and sort of having that different angle on, on the clinical trial results and things like that, I think that also has to be managed really well, because so I've reviewed plain language summaries in the past which have included the patient's perspective on the study, and sometimes it can come across as essentially sort of disguised promotion, having patients say, oh, the fact that this study was done is wonderful, and it's great that we've now got this medication or that type of medication out there and things like that. So it does, I would say it does come with a bit of a excuse the pun, a bit of a health warning in terms of the way in which that's managed and how that content is put across. So it doesn't come across to the reader as we've got some patients to essentially promote or sort of endorse the study. It has to be very much about the unmet needs, the experience, and things like that. So I just wanted to sort of give a bit of a health warning to that.
Sure. Well, thank you, Trishna. So we talked about PLS, try to make PLS more digestible, easy to understand. But what about the access to PLS? Would you say that PLS are easy to find? Catherine, from a publisher perspective, what do you think? Do you think we could improve the accessibility of PLS for patients and clinicians?
Most definitely. I mean, they're not easy to find at all because there's no central repository. They're all over the place, and of course this issue is possibly exacerbated by the fact that we've got all these different formats. Some journals are accepting them, some aren't asking for them, some are, some insist only on text only, some want 50 words, some want 250 words, and on it goes. But it's only really been about a decade since, I think it was the British Journal of Dermatology who first started to include PLS as a regular in their journals. And I hope it was that journal, because otherwise I'm going to get a nasty email in my inbox in a few hours. But this is what I've written, so I've obviously read it, must have been correct somewhere. And 10 years, you know, a decade is not long in the whole scheme of things. And I've seen enormous strides made in the last 24 months, and I'm sure my colleagues here would agree with me, that there's been a real boom. PLS are like mushrooms, you know, big publishers getting involved, dedicating resources, more industry involvement. It's getting much, much better. We're having webinars, a go-go on PLS, and it's just great. It's just great to see. I love to hear that HCPs are using PLS with their patients, using them as a communication tool. Handing them over to patients, using them actually also to help them communicate complex topics to their patients. And as we can see on that slide there that I've just managed to lose, no, there it is. This is, I just bunged in PLS on PubMed. I wanted to see if I just put plain language summary in as a search term in PubMed, what would I see? So it's completely unscientific because there's no detail here at all, but it's a nice graph, and it does show that there are more and more PLS on PubMed over the last couple of years. I think it is just a couple of years, isn't it, really, that peak?
Yeah.
The other thing that I've seen, and I've seen this in the last 12 months, an explosion of advice on how to write PLS, which is very gratifying. I'm sure you've all seen it as well. If you put PLS into Google, almost every single hit is not a PLS, it's how to write PLS, but how they should look. And this is all good. It's all moving in the right direction.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This conversation is very exciting, and I keep having questions. So another question for you, Ewan. What is your opinion about the responsiveness of pharma companies in regards to patient needs of instant information?
Yeah, I think that, you know, patients are becoming increasingly engaged across the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries, and they're key partners along the life cycle of drug development. You know, pharma companies have been, you know, over the years making a focused effort on integrating patient voices in everything we do, from disease education, drug development, including, you know, study protocol discussions, how to design patient-relevant study endpoints, as I mentioned before, clinical trial posting, and publications to build advocacy from the patient community. In particular, you know, the value of patient engagement in medical publications is becoming more and more recognized. So patients are being involved in the planning, development, review, and the distribution of publications, in particular plain language summary. So we have a lot of experience, and we see the excitement from patient authors. You know, they appreciate that we involve them and we work with them and obtaining their input. But I think that we still have a lot of work to do. You know, in pharmaceutical industries, you know, in collaboration with publishers, editors, patient communities, to find ways to help patients easily find these plain language summary. I think, as Catherine and Trishna alluded to, you know, it's still very difficult for patients to find this information. So how do we gather more feedback on ways to improve, and also you know, validate the understanding from the broader general audience? So I think these are some of the areas that we can continue to work on, but we've taken the right leap. I like Catherine's slide here. You know, this peak in plain language summary on PubMed, this started right around, I think, COVID, right? Around 2020.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if COVID has any impact on the increase in patients' needs for you know, accessing plain language summary or publishing them. I think before COVID, we have more engagement face-to-face, but with COVID, is this why digital enhancements, the omni-channels come in to more get in touch with patients? So I think this research finding is interesting, could be a potential driver.
Thank you, Ewan. Thank you very much. So my next point now will be about a different topic, however, still quite important. Yeah, we cannot speak about the evolution of PLS without mentioning AI. So that will make me move to the next one. To the next slide. Yeah, I'm very curious to hear if you have already been able to explore AI when you work on your PLS projects, and what is your opinion about it? Because as we have all heard, some people see AI as an opportunity, some other as a threat. So what is your opinion about this, ladies? Who would like to start? Trishna, maybe?
Yes. So I would like to think that AI, so artificial intelligence, just in case somebody doesn't know what this AI is that we're talking about, I'd like to think that it might be utilised as a tool for writing PLS and also for improving discoverability.
Right.
I don't think that we should be using AI to replace humans in the process. I think it should be used to enhance the process. So, for example, it could aid medical writers, some of whom aren't necessarily specifically trained in plain language. It could help them to write the PLS in the first place. It could help to assess readability and accessibility. I still think that there will be a need for patient advocates to be involved in the process. I'm not saying that because I'm a patient advocate who's involved in the process, but I don't think that AI will be able to sort of ascertain what would be important to patients, those real nuances. They might be able to say, yes, you know, side effects are important, but will it be able to really think like a patient and be able to say, okay, these are the things which we need to include in that specific PLS. So for me, AI it's a tool. It's not a replacement. In having that tool available though, I would hope it might speed up the writing process.
Yep.
And that could then increase the number of PLS that could be written and potentially impact how prevalent they are. So I think there are a lot of good things which AI could help support with. I just don't think we should be replacing or thinking about replacing humans just yet.
Completely agree. Yep. This is how I also envisage AI as an opportunity to have more PLS available and rather in a quite short time frame. Who would like to go next and share opinion about AI? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, next. I view AI, in the same way as Trishna. It's a language tool. It helps support the development of plain language summary. And what we have also used this AI tool is in social listening. To gather qualitative and quantitative insights on the disease burden from patients who discuss it openly in online forums. So using AI and the language processing algorithms, the adoption, the perception of treatment can be dynamically monitored while allowing for these quantitative assessment of their impact on patient symptoms and quality of life. And differing from the traditional methods of gathering patient insights, through the person-to-person interactions or doing survey or focus group, the use of social listening using the AI tool can unlock unbiased insights because these are honest discussions, open discussions among patients themselves, and we can use those information to further enhance our communications with patients. And as Trishna mentioned, AI can also aid in summarizing and translating complex scientific content into different languages. And the benefits are obviously time and cost saving. But the initial investment of training the AI does take time and effort. So I think that the AI cannot replace humans, as Trishna has said in the process. because you need humans to validate the outputs, making sure that it's accurate, it's understandable, and making sure that the validation part with real patients could be done. That's not something AI can do alone.
Sure. Thank you. Catherine, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah. I mean, as you know, there are many discussions are happening all the time among medical writers and medical publishing and editors about ChatGPT in particular. We talk about AI, but there's an awful lot of specific conversation about ChatGPT. I've used the public one. I've used it to play with, but I've also used it to summarize a very long research paper, and I wanted to see what it was going to come up with, and I was blown away by it.
Wow.
And terrified by it in equal measure. And I wasn't even using the subscription service, which is many more times more powerful. So I agree with Trishna that it shouldn't be used to write to replace humans, but I'm a little bit scared that it will do at some point in the very near future. I don't think we're talking distant future. I think we're talking kind of right now. I think we're still at the point, though, and I agree with you, and that we can't expect ChatGPT to validate and to assess. And we're still at the point where you have to be very careful. You're phrasing your questions very specifically, and you have to know what a PLS is, or you have to know what patient information looks like in order to be able to assess what ChatGPT gives back. There are ongoing issues with referencing and acknowledging sources. We know this, and I asked it to give me a source for a piece of information it had given me, and it told me it had limitations because it was only artificial intelligence, which I thought rather strange and freaky. One thing, though, which is quite interesting, we hear that ChatGPT can't replace humans, but a recent study carried out by the University of California in San Diego looked at responses to medical forum questions. People writing into a Reddit medical forum saying, help, I've got a big swollen toe, what could it be? And ChatGPT responded to these questions, as did real human doctors. And then raters were asked to look at these responses and to assess them on various different criteria. And the ChatGPT responses were rated 7 times more empathetic than the responses from the human beings. So I think that's quite fascinating. I think it can be used. We should be looking at what was it about those responses that raters thought were empathetic. But yeah, I don't know. I've got a heavy heart.
Use that to teach the.
Yes, exactly. Well, I totally agree with you. And I was sent a paper by a colleague here at Kaga. Suzanne Meister sent me a paper from the New York Times where doctors were actually using ChatGPT to communicate with their patients because they struggled with the empathy, and ChatGPT was doing a better job of it. So they're already using it, and I do disagree with a heavy heart that it can't replace humans in knowing what patients want. I think it learns. It's the best pupil in the world. It learns rapidly, and you probably only need to tell it once. Since I last looked 2 weeks ago, it would probably give me a better answer to the same question. It's definitely useful to summarize a complex paper. Will it replace the writer? Yes, in some cases. Should it replace the writer and the patient? No, of course it shouldn't. And we need to take steps to protect ourselves, not just writers, but society, humanity, I think, to establish guidance and to protect ourselves from worst case scenarios, I think.
True.
Sorry to be so gloomy.
No, well, thank you very much. I see the time now, so we are already reaching the end of this webinar, and as I would like to give the opportunity to the audience to ask questions, I will just have a final one for you. Would you like to summarize what is important to consider when doing a PLS? So maybe I thought that you could, each one of you could give some recommendation. Trishna, we'll start with you if you don't mind. Maybe you could share some recommendation from a patient perspective.
Sure. So I think firstly, determine who you want your main audience to be. That's the first thing. If it's patients, then create the PLS accordingly. And then remember that it's not all about the content and language. There's also format, layout, all those things that we've already spoken about. That also makes a difference in terms of the understandability. How easy is it going to be to process the information? So yeah, think about format and layout as well. And then finally, and this won't come as a surprise to anyone, get patient advocates involved in the process. We are out here, we're experienced, we have the skills, the knowledge and the expertise to help to make PLS better documents. So those are my three top takeaways and three sort of things to remember.
Ewan, maybe you would like to go next. What will be your recommendation, especially to UPs, if they want to consider PLS as another effective format to include in their engagement plan?
Yeah, I think Trishna, it's very well said. These key takeaways, what's important in the process of developing the PLS. I just want to add that being a good listener to patients is really, really important. It takes time. I remember those kickoff calls with patient authors. It can take a whole hour just listening to what they have to say about what their experiences are, what are the barriers, what are unhappy about the current communications with their physicians, what their needs are, how their voices should be heard. So I think this is something we all need to work on, whether it's developing the PLS or just understanding their needs and insights. It's easier said to be done than being done. So I would encourage everybody who are thinking about working with patients to really be a good listener.
Right. Thank you, Ewan. Thank you very much. Your turn, Catherine. What are your recommendations, especially from a publisher perspective? Do you have specific criteria or requirements?
Yeah, I obviously agree with you and Trishna there. You have to establish who the primary audience is first and foremost. And from the publisher's perspective, you have to make sure that all the stakeholders are on the same page, that we all know who the primary readership is for this particular PLS. And having established who it is, then we can have the discussions around the most appropriate format for dissemination. I think one of the issues with PLS that come in 6 months after a paper has been published, and this PLS is not going to be peer reviewed by the original journal, I think we need to be involving the authors of the original paper, and at the very least, the lead author should be involved to sign off to review the PLS. And there should be a declaration of any financial involvement, of course, transparency statements from industry or institutional funders. And finally, last but definitely not least, yes, involving patients in the writing or reviewing of the PLS should be absolutely fundamental, just as we do at CAGA, in fact, for all of our patient healthcare materials.
Well, thank you for your recommendations, ladies. I think it was very useful. I see there is only 6 minutes left, so I will open up for questions. So let me check the box. Right. So I have a question here, which is, can patients be authors of PLS? I think we answered partially to that question already. Who would like to go and answer this question?
I think the short answer to that is yes, why not? So there are things that you have to consider. So if you're going to have a patient who's helping to author the PLS itself, then do they have the right skills, the expertise? Do they understand what the PLS is for? If you've got a patient author on the original, so manuscript or poster or something, then as Catherine mentioned, I mean, getting the original authors involved in the development of the PLS. If you have a patient author already involved in the original, get them involved in the development of the PLS. So there are certain things you need to consider, but yes, why not?
Good. Good answer.
Yeah, and I also want to add that, as patient authors, we have to educate them upfront, right? Making sure that, there's the right expectations, what their author role is, making them understand the ICMJE guidelines in terms of their contributions and the time commitment, for their availability to provide the input. It could be overwhelming for some patients when they're suffering from, cancer, or they have a lot of other, personal issues. They may not want to commit to something like this, but setting the expectations up front and getting them involved and committed and do the right authorship responsibilities, have those fulfilled throughout the publication development process, is something important to consider.
Definitely. We have a few other questions. I don't think we'll be able to go through all of them. One question, a practical question, will you be sharing the slides from today's webinar, please? Yes, no problem. I will be happy to share the slides with you, and a recording will be available 2 days after this webinar. I'll take another question. We often talk about PLS for HCPs, caregivers, researchers, as well as for patients. Is it possible to produce one PLS that will satisfy all readers? Good question. Who would like to go to answer to this one?
I'll answer that one if I may.
Sure.
I think, because I mentioned earlier one format that I think might be able to satisfy the wider readership, and that's the standalone plain language summary of publication, because you will have a text summary to begin these PLSPs, as they're called. That might satisfy the HCP, the time-pressed HCP, who can then decide whether he wants or she wants to read the original paper. Then we move into the infographics. You've got the visual, which is going to satisfy hopefully the patients and the caregivers. I would say it's probably the only format that might satisfy, although no, it's probably not the only format, but yes, it is possible to. But I think at the end of the day, we should be talking primarily to patients, because they're the ones that we're trying to reach with PLS.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I think the other point we've touched on was, getting these target audiences involved on authorship, right? The original author from the scientific paper could be invited as an author. The patients, the caregivers, anybody that we want to reach can be represented on the authorship to be able to co-create the content together. That way it can, be applicable to everybody across the board.
Good point.
Good. Another question, and I think that would be the last one. I'm sorry for the others, but I'm happy to provide answers to the other questions by email. So last one, how to become a medical PLS writer? I'm a physician and international public health professional, so where to begin? Who would like to, maybe, I don't know, who would like to answer, to go?
Well, I wonder, does the questioner mean how can I write a PLS, or how do I become? Yes, probably, because I don't imagine a physician would want to be moving into publishing full time.
I don't think that was a question. To me, the question was how.
So, well, there are great courses available. CAGA themselves have a great course, a free course on how to produce PLS. There are other courses out there online. But yes, there's a lot of guidance online on what they are, how to go about it. CAGA's online course is particularly good. And I'm not just saying that because Trishna and I were involved in it.
Yeah, you might see us.
Two experts here.
Well, considering the time, I think we need to finish this webinar, unfortunately. It was a great discussion. So I just would like to thank everyone in the audience for tuning in, and thanks to our great panel for sharing that time and expertise. It was much appreciated. I enjoyed it. So if you'd like to rewatch the webinar, as I said earlier, we will be sharing a recording very soon. You can share it with your colleagues and come back to us if you have any questions. So again, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the webinar as much as we did. So, and last but not least, ladies, thank you so much for your time, for this great conversation. And I'm already looking forward to organizing a next webinar with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.